this morning, maybe just because we've been in the book of Matthew for the last however many months, it just felt right to sort of keep it in Matthew for this Sunday morning. So this is the first 10 verses of Matthew 28. It says, after the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. And the angel said to the women, do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He is risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly tell his disciples he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you. So when the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid, yet filled with joy, and ran to tell the disciples, suddenly Jesus met them. Greetings, he said. They came to him and clasped his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me. This is the word of the Lord. Jesus, I don't know, God, this is the most important day of our faith. God, everything we are hinges on this day. And so, God, there is an element of celebration. We are grateful. We are thankful. We know that you rose again from the grave. And this morning I'm asking Jesus that you would take these thoughts that are so, feeble, so small in comparison to your resurrection, and that God, somehow that you would take them, transform them, use them however you see fit this morning for us. I ask that you would transform us and make us new, not through my words, but through your power, your resurrection power, Jesus. And so, would you help this morning? See your name. Amen. I love this. There's so much in these 10 verses. And maybe because there's so much in these 10 verses, I didn't bother with the rest of Matthew 28. But, earlier this week, so my wife for the last, I don't know if it's been a year or so, has been a part of a community Bible study at South Tampa Fellowship. It's been a way for her to sort of meet people, get outside the house, have a space where she doesn't kind of have to be the leader, but she can just sort of be poured into. And it's a space for the kids to sort of also have childcare and her not have to think about them for a good 2 hours. And so it's been good for them too, as they've done that. And every so often at this CBS, they will have maybe a day where the kids come into the main section with the women and kind of sing songs that they've been memorizing, verses that they memorize. It's kind of cute and always chaotic. But I go because I'm trying to be a good dad, and I'll go support the kids. And as a parent, it's always sort of a little validating when you see other kids struggle to sit still and stay on stage and wander off. It's okay, not just us. It's all of us. Okay, cool. So this past Thursday was one of those. And before the kids came out, there was a moment where they had us just kind of take a moment in worship, which for them in that particular setting, it was King of Kings, I think from Hillsong, was playing over the speakers, and we all just kind of sheepishly sang wherever we were. Because it was kind of awkward and we're all sort of spread out. But it was kind of interesting to me. There was a moment where, because of the way that the sanctuary was built up, there was the cross in the middle and there was a cross on either side. And it was, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it, it was their way of sort of the crucifixion, right? The 3 crosses. I for whatever reason, it didn't occur to me in the moment. Now it's occurring to me that that's what was happening. But there was a moment where I was listening to the music, looking at the cross, reflecting in worship, and just thinking if you've ever taken a moment to think about what Christians believe, what we actually believe, sociologically, anthropologically, if somebody was from the outside looking in at Christians, we would have to be the strangest, most dumbest people on the face of the planet. Because we believe some ridiculous things. Can we be honest about that for a second? I'm not even just talking about the virgin birth, although that's weird too. But I'm talking about we believe that a guy died on the cross and that somehow that means something for all of humanity. And not just all of humanity, but the entire cosmos is somehow wrapped up in the death of this person. That's strange. And then on top of that, we believe that this person came back from the dead. And I'm sorry, people don't come back from the dead. And it's not even just that we think that he came back from the dead to die again. No, like Jesus does something, we believe, that no one has ever done before or since, that he came back from the dead and is alive forevermore. That's strange, illogical, so stupid. Like, it makes no sense. And it's not just that we kind of regrettably believe this. We are convinced of it. I mean, it reminds me of what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians, that if this was not actually true, then we are to be pitied among all people. We are fools, liars. And it was a really strange moment looking at the cross and singing the song. It felt like not necessarily a moment of confrontation, although the cross always is that. The cross is always a confrontation to us. But it felt like a moment of confirmation, of invitation. Do you actually believe this? Do you really believe it? Do you believe it still, now, here, today, in this chapel? And I do. I did, and I still do. Seems to me that belief in the resurrection is absolutely ridiculous unless it actually happened. And if it did happen, what does that mean for us, both generally and for us today? And this morning, as I look at Matthew 28, I can't get away from the relationship between the resurrection and a life without fear. It seems to me that if the resurrection is real, then fear is finished. And maybe if I were a real preacher, I'd say something like, if Jesus walked out of the grave, then fear has no legs to stand on. You caught it. But I'm not a real preacher, so we won't go that route. We'll just say that fear is finished. All the emotions we associate with the resurrection, I don't know how often fear is one of them. We may think of joy, we may think of triumph, we may think of surprise, right? But looking at this passage, I mean, there's prevalence of fear. The guards are afraid. The women are afraid. Anyone who is there is afraid. To be a witness to the resurrection would have been both confusing and terrifying. The guards are given a very particular job. The guards, their job is to guard that tomb with their life, right? There was rumors that the disciples were going to come and try to steal the body because they believed that Jesus was going to rise again from the dead. So they had specifically put the guards in place to make sure no one got to that body. So that's what they're there to do. And imagine with me for a second, you are a guard, you have weapons, you're counting on a human enemy, right? And you have spears and weapons and means at your disposal to use against human enemies. What you could not have accounted for was an angel from heaven coming down, rolling away a stone, and sitting there what's up? That's nope, this is above me now. That's officially, I don't get paid to do this. You prepared me. This was not part of the orientation. Imagine, I was trying to think of what is a movie clip that would be a good symbol of that? You're getting ready to go against an army and Transformers show up or something. And you're just nope, this is above me. I'm going to go home or something. And I imagine that their fear is only magnified when they realize that the tomb, it probably would have taken them a moment. But I think this is really interesting. I imagine their fear would have been magnified when they realized that the tomb that they were guarding was actually empty anyway. This is an important thing to note in this passage. The tomb is not open so that Jesus can walk out. Jesus had already left the building. It was so that the eyewitnesses could get in. They were guarding an empty tomb. That would have freaked me out. They become so afraid that these living guards become like dead men, while the one who was supposed to be dead walks around very much alive. What a twist. But the women are also afraid. And I imagine there's layers to their fear. I mean, their rabbi had died. By all accounts, up until this point, Jesus was another failed Messiah. And you have to understand that when failed Messiahs died, depending on how threatening your followers were supposed to be, it's not just that the Messiah was killed, it's that the followers were also killed too. here are these women getting ready to go to the tomb to face the guys who were responsible for the death of their rabbi. What were they expecting to find? Certainly not angels. And any interaction with angels in Scripture, if you've ever seen it, no one is ever excited to see angels. We'd be like, oh, that's so cool. I want to see an angel. No one is ever excited in Scripture to see an angel because it's terrifying. It's like this could either be really good or really bad. Like, God is happy with me, or I might die. Like, that's what's happening here. I'm going to meet God very soon. And yet the angels tell them that Jesus has risen. And they are told to tell the other disciples. And that in itself is terrifying because who else knows about this? At what point do the guards, are they going to come to their senses and realize something has gone terribly wrong here? When is Jerusalem going to know that something has shifted? So what does that mean for them? There is fear even in the commission. And in that place, they encounter the risen Jesus. I think it's so fascinating. And he tells them not to be afraid. And in place of their sorrow, they're given a mandate, a purpose, a mission to accomplish. And I don't have time to get into this, but I think there's this beautiful interplay of testimony, of evidence, and personal encounter in this passage. And I think for some of us, that's like a diagnostic of our own life. Like you maybe have heard the testimony of somebody else that Jesus is risen. You may have even done the investigative work or you're on that journey, but you have yet to encounter him. And that's what you need this morning, is that you need a personal encounter with Jesus. But ultimately, for these women and for these guards, their fear is anchored in their survival. But for the women, the resurrection is an invitation to a life without fear. And so it is with us, that all of our fear actually is anchored in our fight for survival. I mean, I want you to take a moment. Like, have you ever had a moment where you were not afraid of something and then you learned to be afraid of something? It had never maybe even occurred to you for a second to be afraid of a thing until you saw something happen and you're like, okay, now I'm actually afraid of that thing. Just take a moment to think about that. In fact, go ahead and turn to the person next to you. Maybe you something very came to the forefront of your mind. Like, you remember the moment you became afraid of frogs. Like, there was a moment where you were not afraid of frogs, and then you became afraid of frogs. Like, go ahead, turn to the person next to you for a second. What was that thing? What was the thing that you were afraid of, and what was the moment that, made you afraid of that thing? Go ahead, take it, share.
All about it. You're probably inside. And I thought, so, why today, ground? So, like, I was there, called me. I saw it. Picture, there's a kid that, so I mean, it's a minute, I don't know. Yeah, no. Well, it's fine. We can't get. Shit. So yeah, let's set to say it's top. What on there? Yeah, but
all right, I'm super curious. I want to know what people are afraid of and what happened. What's the story? What's the story, Morning Glory?
I know they take Echo.
Final Destination.
Death itself.
Wow, Final Destination taught you that anything can kill you. Okay, fair games. Other things. Hippos, really? What's the story of that?
There's stories in children's books, as so fun and happy, then they actually kill a lot of humans.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, okay. Hippos. I did not know to be afraid of hippos until this very moment. Now I'm afraid of hippos. Other things. Lobsters? What's the story there?
So I'm really afraid of insects.
Ah.
And they're very closely related, so I started seeing all the insect traits and
I love that. I'm sorry that that's your life, but yeah, it's a thing. For my mother-in-law, she does not do water or beaches because she saw the movie Jaws. There's a thing that it gets triggered in us, right? I remember the moment I became afraid of dogs. So I was a kid I can't remember how old I would have been. I know I was small, and I remember I was with my godmother. So she was helping her neighbors. Her neighbors were out of town, and she was going to feed their dog, and I was with her for the day. And so she took me with her to go feed the dog. And the dog was a really friendly dog. His name was Tag. And she kind of warned me in advance, like, Tag, he's kind of rambunctious. Like, he's not dangerous. He's not going to hurt you, but he's excitable. He'll be really excited to see you. So you just kind of have to stay still. You got to relax, stay close to me. And I think she might even try to, like, guard me with her body from the dog. But the second she, like, opened that door and Tag saw me, he, like, came out. He was excited. I, like, took off running. Like, it was all bets were off the table. And if you know anything about dogs, what happens when you run? They chase you. And so I was like this little kid trying to run away from this dog. I think I tripped, fell, and he didn't hurt me. But like the feeling of that, like the visceral fear of my life around that dog made me afraid of dogs until I got one like 10 years later. Like it's that thing. Like we know fear in our bones. It's a thing that we experience. It's one of the most primary human emotions. And what's fascinating to me is that fear, for the most part, is learned. Like there's some things that we carry with us that we feel like, oh, it's just been a part of us for so long. It's always been there. But that's actually not true. That most of our fear is learned. I think some people would say that of all the fears that we have, only 2 of them are innate to us. And maybe that's the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. And that's it. Everything else we've learned from somewhere else. And if we sat with our fears long enough, we might be able to pinpoint a moment in which we became afraid of that thing. Maybe to Essence's point, if we were to dig a layer deeper behind those fears, asking why we're afraid of those things, we would say maybe we're afraid of being hurt or afraid of being ashamed, right? Some of us, we fear failure or financial ruin or something. But I think a layer deeper than that is the truth that we all yearn for survival and self-preservation because what we ultimately fear is death. And the things that we're afraid of are tangible, physical representations of our mortality. Fear is about self-preservation. I'm reminded of, last summer we were in the Minor Prophets and, last summer. I can't even remember what month we're in. But last summer we were in the Minor Prophets and John Dengler, he was talking about Genesis 3 and sort of the Eastern Orthodox way of reading the fall. That is not just about a moral stain, although that's true, but it's also about this mortal condition that we've been given, that we die. And because we die, we will do whatever it takes to stay alive. It's why we lie or avoid putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations. It's why we dominate and power over one another. We don't want to die, and all the things we fear are signposts to that greater threat. Physical pain reminds us of our frailty, that we could die. Shame and embarrassment, it's a social death of sorts, right? We want to preserve our lives, and we all live in the shadow of the fear of that death. And it isn't just us, but it's all of humanity. It always has been true of humanity. Like in the ancient mind, death was the great enemy. It had never been beaten. No one had ever come face to face with death and won. There was no cure for it. And yet Jesus does what no one had done before or since. He defeats death. Not to just die again, but to live forevermore. This is 1 Corinthians 15. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? This great enemy that was previously defeated has been bested in Jesus. And what we find in that same passage is that Jesus is the first fruits of those who fall asleep. We will all raise again. We will all rise again. Death has no hold over us. So then the question becomes, if death is the great enemy and death itself will die, well then what is there left to fear? Honestly. Jesus can tell these women not to be afraid because whatever self-preservation or survival tactic they were holding on to becomes irrelevant in light of the resurrection. The fact that he tells them not to be afraid implies that fear, although it's instinctual and it's visceral, it is a choice. I think this is fascinating. There's a way that we act as human beings that just, it's natural to who we are. And yet Jesus shows us a new way to be human. He invites us to a different kind of life that says you don't have to be succumbed to your human instincts. You can choose a different way of being in the world. And so if fear is the way that we can be, it is a choice. We can live a life separated from that fear, no longer guided by it. And we talk about it often, so I won't belabor it here, but it seems that we live in such an anxious time. And all this week, I've been wrestling with the question of, well, how does our anxiety and the resurrection, how do they meet together? What does the resurrection say to our anxieties? And maybe it's something like this, that the resurrection tells us that there is bigger things than our fears, that our biggest fears aren't the truest things about reality, that there is something bigger beyond our imminent frame. Our biggest fears, our deepest anxieties must be held in tension with the God who raises the dead to life and a Messiah who overcomes the grave and replaces our fear with something purposeful, a commission and hope. And that's what we see in these women. As terrified as they are, they encounter something so powerful, it changes their primary orientation to the world. They come to the tomb sad and afraid, and they leave still a little afraid, but there's joy and there's urgency. They have work to do, and in so doing, they become the first evangelists in a time where women's testimonies they weren't even credible in court, but they become first evangelists and witnesses to the resurrection. This is the power of the resurrection, that those of us who are constantly afraid no longer have to be. You know, some of us, you've heard us tell the story of Praise in the Park, our friends Anthony and Nicole, who they were running park services for some of the homeless community in Burrell Park. And I mean, there's fantastic people, like love them so much. And, you know, some of my favorite stuff of sitting down with them and some of the conversations that we had when, you know, I would just ask them how things were going, it's just, it was not a part of their framework. Like, I think Nicole might have been like in social work or a foster care worker, and her husband, like, he would plan father-daughter dances. Like, they lived in Riverview, which is kind of a nicer part of town anyway. And so they're like, what are we doing in this park? Why are we in this park with these homeless people in like this dangerous place where there's drugs being sold and all sorts of things going on? Why are we here? And yet they were. And, you know, they kind of had built up a relationship with the homeless in that park to the point where they would have their meetings, and there would be a guy, a homeless guy, I forgot what his name was. It wasn't like Mr. Steve or something, but he'd like sit in on their meetings, and he'd always have like a giant stick in their meetings just in case anything went off in the park. He would be able to protect them because he loved them so much and wanted them to keep coming back. Like, he hardly paid attention to anything that they said, but he had their back. So then one day, of course, you guys know the story that like they're in one of their park services, and like sermon wraps up, they're getting ready to head into communion, and they witness a stabbing happening in the park. Like, a guy gets stabbed in the park, and it's like, oh man, what do we do? Like, Anthony, who was, I think he might have been preaching, he like gave it to somebody else to kind of finish doing communion. He like ran over, got involved, like tried to help the guy and like called the cops. But because of the part of town that it's in, like no one's in any rush to get to Burrell Park if you call about an emergency. And so he's like covered in blood, and to make matters worse, his kids are there, and his kids are like, you know, his daughter's like 13 or 16 or something like that. And then their friends, their kids are there, and their kids are young. And so it's just this gnarly thing. Like, they knew that it was dangerous, but to like actually witness death happen in front of you, and not just in front of you, but in front of your kids. What do you even do to that? And not even just your kids, but your friends' kids who aren't normally there, but just so happen to be there on this day at this time. And, you know, kind of what's fascinating is that everyone sort of thought like, oh, surely that would be the end of Praise in the Park. Like, they're going to not come back to this park again. But independently, each and every single one of those leaders said, no, that's exactly why we're here. And so we're going to come back the next week, and we're going to be here every week after that. And my favorite part of that is that one of those leaders is a guy who struggles with social anxiety so badly that he can't go into restaurants without having a panic attack. He also says, I'm going to be here next week. He says, I feel like I have to be. And that guy lives in like Orlando. It's not even like he lives close. But he's like, no, I'll make the drive. I will be here next week. And to me, it's like, what has to happen in a person that a person who's afraid to go into a restaurant says, okay, there was a stabbing in this park last week and I'm going to be here the next week. Like, you can count me in. I'll be there. And to me, that's Jesus. This is what Jesus does. He takes anxious people and turns them into those who fear no tomb, willing to go even where death dwells because he sends them there. And it's not that we don't experience fear, but it's that it no longer takes the driver's seat. It has to take the back seat to something so much more important than whatever it is that we're afraid of. As visceral as it fears, most of our fears are learned and they can be overcome. I think this is fascinating. Reminds me of this TED Talk I watched the other day, and maybe you've seen it. It's this guy from Beijing, China, who he was kind of telling the story of 100 days of rejection. Have you guys heard of this before? 100 days of rejection? So check this out. So this guy, he was 6 years old. He kind of starts by talking about when he was 6 years old, he was in class and like the teacher ran the students through this exercise where she had gifts for the kids and they were all like sort of in a corner. And the way that it worked was, I think before a kid could get their gift, maybe you had to like say something nice about them. Like the class had to say something nice about the kid. So there's like 40 kids in this classroom and like she's thinking, this is going to be so great. What could possibly go wrong? It goes wrong. And so there's all these kids, they're getting their names called and people are like saying nice things about these kids and whatever. And so the 40 dwindles down to 20. That 20 gets down to 5. The 5 gets down to 3. And it's the last 3 kids, which he's one of. And no one has anything to say about these last 3 kids. None of the other kids in the class have anything nice to say about these last 3 kids. Not because they were like mean kids necessarily. They just didn't have anything to say. To where he's crying as a 6-year-old kid. And the teacher's just kind of like, all right, well, maybe if you guys behave better next year, people have nice things to say about you. Go ahead, get your gift. And like, that's it. And that's like all that happens as he gets the gift. But the damage has been done. And he carries that memory inside of him for the next 25 years of his life. But what's sad is that he also, while he has this like 6-year-old person inside of him always, is that he still has these dreams of like being an entrepreneur, of starting like a really successful company, of like having a company so successful it buys out Microsoft, which is kind of crazy, but it's ambitious and that's what he wants to do. But he can't handle rejection because he remembers what it's like to be that 6-year-old kid who had no one say anything nice about him. And so he like read online about like this rejection exposure therapy where, yeah, you go out and you try to get rejected and it's supposed to desensitize you from the pain. So he's like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this for 100 days of rejection. And I'm going to video it and I'm going to make a video blog about it and it's going to be a whole thing. And so he did this for 100 days. First day, he goes up to a stranger and asks for $100. Like just outlandish things, just to intentionally feel what it's like to be rejected. So he goes to a security guard, can I borrow $100? Security guard goes, no, why? And he like goes, okay, thanks. And like runs off. He's like, bye. And he just like leaves. And then he like watches it later. And he's like, wait, the guy actually asked me why. Like, he wasn't actually that intimidating. What was I so afraid of in this moment? Okay, well, next time I'm actually going to like lean in. Like, I'm not going to run away the first time that they say no. Like, I'll follow up with more questions. And so then the second day was like asking for a burger refill, which isn't actually a thing in case you were wondering, but he was at like this burger joint. It was like, hey man, like, I really like your burgers. Can I have a burger refill? And the guy behind the counter is like, what is that? And he's like a drink refill, except with a whole burger. And the guy was like, no, like we don't do burger refills here. I can ask my manager about it, but I can't give it to you today. And it was like this really interesting interaction. Next time, I think he went to like Krispy Kreme and asked for like Olympic ring or donuts in the shape of Olympic rings. And they were actually trying to figure out how they're going to make it work. I think Krispy Kreme actually said yes to him and like made it work. And it was like, what is happening here? Like he learned that if he just sort of like went for it, that actually the objections, if he even anticipated the objections, that actually he doesn't have to be afraid of rejection. It leads to a whole nother conversation. It did something in him. It changed him in some way, almost like some sort of vaccination, some like small exposure to a thing somehow made him immune to rejection in a larger way. And I think this is how some of us can overcome some of our fears, right? This idea of exposure therapy, overcoming something by slowly introducing yourself to that thing in some gradual way, right? You get your own dog, you take baby steps in public speaking, whatever that thing is. But then what about death itself? How do you overcome that fear? And I wonder if the way we overcome death is through exposing ourselves to it as well. To die to ourselves that we may have resurrection life in Christ. Not just metaphorically, but actual resurrection life. It's as Victor Hugo said, that the tomb is not a blind alley, it is a thoroughfare. It closes in the twilight to open with the dawn. Brings me back to the scene in Band of Brothers, this sort of mini-series set in World War II, where if you've ever seen it, there's this guy, Blythe, and he's kind of confessing to Lieutenant Spears his fear. He's talking about how when they landed on D-Day, he fell asleep in a ditch while his team is going out and doing things that he didn't even bother to look for his platoon. He didn't look for them at all. He just kind of stayed in that ditch. And so Lieutenant Spears, he asks him his name, and he kind of looks at him and he says, "You know why you hid in that ditch, Blythe?" To which Blythe responds, "I was scared." And Lieutenant Spears says, "We're all scared. You hid in that ditch because you think there's still hope. But Blythe, the only hope you have is to accept the fact that you're already dead. Then you'll be able to function like a soldier." It just makes me think that if I have died with Christ and it is no longer I who live, does the extent that I'm afraid reveal the extent that I'm still concerned with self-preservation? The ways that I'm still trying to save my own life? Does the extent of my willingness to be guided by fear reveal the extent of my surrender or lack of, a way that I'm still learning to die? I can't help but to think that if fear is about survival, then the way we overcome it is to meet the one who has defeated death and promises us eternal life. It's surrendering the reins of your life to him. And when you do, what you get is courage. Because if the resurrection is real, then to live is Christ and to die is gain. I'm going to end up in a second, but I think it is worth mentioning that, the guards, they're afraid in this passage, and never once are they told not to be afraid. The guards are just left panicked. That's just their state. Exactly. They should actually be afraid. The difference between them and the women is that the women are looking for Jesus. They are his friend, actually. And they're on the winning side. And maybe there's people in our lives, maybe even people in this room that aren't afraid, but maybe should be. Are they looking for Jesus? Are they his friend? Does he know them? Does he know you? The beautiful thing is that you don't have to live as an enemy of God. You can be his friend. You can receive an invitation to a life without fear. All you have to do is to die to yourself, to trade your life for his. So how do we live without fear? Ultimately, I think it's that we become a friend of God. So worship team, you can come up. I'll wrap up soon. When I look at my life, I see the way that fear has driven most of my decisions. Fear of change, of loss, of leadership, of exposure and embarrassment. I see the way I've tried to navigate my life with those fears through my actions and my behaviors. For so long, fear and shame have been drivers in my life. And I just can't help but to wonder, what if they didn't have to be, though? Like, what might I do differently if fear didn't have the final say in my life? Maybe I'd dream bigger. Maybe I'd take more chances in ministry and in leadership. Maybe I'd be bolder in sharing my faith and inviting people to investigate Jesus. Maybe I'd be more straightforward or transparent. And as we wrap up, what about you? What might you do differently if fear didn't have the final say in your life? Maybe you'd invite people into your messy home. Maybe you'd invite people into your messy life. Maybe you'd make friends with a stranger. Maybe you'd share the word or the image that God has put on your heart for a person. Maybe for some of you, you would actually say yes to Jesus. Like you've heard the testimony. Maybe you've even looked into Jesus, but you're afraid to say yes because of what it might cost you. And to that, the resurrection beckons you too to live without fear. What might you do differently if fear didn't have the final say in your life? And when you ask that question and you sit with it long enough, you realize the way that fear has hindered us all. And I just can't help but to imagine how the world would be changed when the church lives without fear. Imagine that with me. The resurrection invites us to believe and to live another story. And so this morning, that's what I want to do. I want to invite you to live without fear, to lose your life for his sake, to give up your need to save face or preserve your own life so that you can fully enter into the joy and the triumph of his mission. And I think it begins here in worship, because our fears disappear when we gaze upon the resurrected one. Fear leaves us myopic. It leaves us focused. And the worship, it forces us to open our eyes. We become, our fears become eclipsed in the light of the glory of the resurrected one. I can't help but to wonder, what if the antidote to our fears is worship? Not by fixing our eyes on the winds or the waves, but on the one who stands above it all. Not focusing on death or the tomb, but the one who conquers it. This is Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Fear becomes irrelevant in the face of the resurrected Jesus. And so we worship. And we worship till our fears disappear and the church is emboldened until all of Tampa Bay hears. We worship until the earth is covered with the knowledge of his glory like waters cover the sea. We worship because death is defeated and sin is forgiven and the devil has been vanquished once and for all. This morning, I want to join with the women in clasping onto the feet of Jesus, the risen King. So I invite you to worship him, join with all of heaven in declaring the news in our workplaces, in our classrooms, in our gyms, in our coffee shops. The resurrection is an invitation to a whole new world order. That like in the old way of things entropy and they atrophy, but there is new life that comes through the resurrection, and it is coming again in fullness, in time. And our proclamation is a wake-up call to a world that is asleep. Everything has changed, and so everything must change. Revolution is in full swing, guys. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Jesus, we thank you.